Hello and welcome to the online version of CMIS310, Chapter 7. My name's Tim Jacks. I'm filling in for Jim Musselman. My goal today is just to cover material very quickly with you about Chapter 7, Input-Output Technology. Musselman and I cover each other's classes all the time, so I'm very comfortable with this material, especially since I used to do all kinds of PC support for a living. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. So I'll do what I can to make I/O stuff interesting for you. So here we go. Just a quick note on the way I do my slides. In my classes, I tend to put really important points in red and FYI information in green. And I tell my students that things that you see in red, you'll probably see on an exam. Things in green, you probably will not see on an exam. I don't know that we can hold Musselman accountable for all this, but I think it's a good way to kind of prioritize the information that we're covering here together. So these are the chapter objectives. Basically, we're getting into all the different devices that you can connect as peripherals to your PC. So from different types of graphics interfaces and graphics cards and monitors to different types of printers. I'm going to skip over silly stuff like keyboards and mice. I mean, really. Scanners, sound cards, also I skip because I just don't see sound cards as a business issue. A lot of times you don't even have sound capabilities in a company-issued laptop, and certainly you're not doing any high-end audio with a company-issued desktop or laptop. And then I'll wrap up with some real-world I/O issues that I've run into over the years. So here we go. You're probably getting tired of looking at this map, but I would encourage you to remember this map when you get into my CMIS 468 class on telecommunications, because it's helpful to remember that any PC is just made up of three components: processor, storage, input, output. The reason this is important for telecom is because a router is basically a PC. It has a processor, it has storage, and handles input output, even though it doesn't look like a PC. So just file that away for 468. Because monitors and printers are both output devices, taking things from the PC and either printing them out or displaying them on a screen, that's output. They have a lot of features in common and a lot of similar ways of doing things, such as for both monitors and printers, we tend to measure clarity or resolution in dots per inch DPI. So the higher the numbers, 1024 by 768 is better resolution than 800 by 600. Or if you're printing off at 150 DPI, 300 DPI is going to look better. Now the problem with printing off things at a higher resolution, you'd think a higher resolution is automatically better. It's not automatically better. 300 DPI is really only good if you're doing professional publishing, like for an actual magazine. The problem is the file size gets geometrically huge, and storage becomes a problem if you're trying to use 300 DPI graphics, photos, for example, for everything. If you've ever done any digital photography work, you know saving a file as 300 DPI or 600 DPI or higher takes up a lot of space. So for example, I'm careful in PowerPoint, if you've ever kind of gone into the formatting function, I guess when you highlight a picture and choose format, you can click on compress picture and you can change the DPI of the photo. And so what you can do is change all the photos in your PowerPoint presentation. If you've got a presentation that's 20 meg or something and you're having trouble emailing it because it's too big for an email message, if you go through and just reduce the DPI within PowerPoint to 150 or even 75 DPI is just fine for on screen, that'll reduce your PowerPoint file down to 3 or 4 meg. I try to remember to do that for all of my PowerPoint so it doesn't take so long to download. So that's one of the many reasons why DPI is important. Just a quick example, an extreme example. So 50 DPI, nobody uses that anymore because it's so grainy. Sometimes you'll hear this called stair-stepping. It looks stair-steppy as opposed to having smooth, rounded edges. So the the higher resolution, the higher dots per inch, the sharper the edges are going to look. Another similarity in output devices between monitors and printers is the way we measure the size of fonts, measured in points. So I wouldn't ask you on an exam how big a point is, 1/72nd of an inch. And I think everybody's already familiar with selecting font sizes in Microsoft Word or any application. So on the next slide, just examples of different point sizes. Be careful on different operating systems like Mac operating systems. Sometimes it measures things in pitch, not points. And if things are measured in pitch or per inch, 24 pitch is going to be huge compared to 24 points. So you can't use the same numbers on the Mac OS unless you go in and change your preferences. Just a little sidebar for you. Color for output devices can be handled in a couple of standard ways. RGB is very standard for red, green, blue. CMY is very standard. I wouldn't test you on the difference between additive and subtractive colors, although it is interesting to see the science behind it. C for cyan, M for magenta, Y for yellow. And if you have something professionally printed, they might use CMYK, so the K, because they didn't use B for black because B is used for blue, so K for black. If you are doing really professional color matching, again, I've got this in green, but the Pantone color matching system is the professional standard for graphic artists, for publishers that want to get the exact, this exact shade of red, number 1026. And when I was supporting a graphics art team at Corning years ago, they would get so upset when the exact shade of red on the printout wasn't exactly the same Pantone shade as what was on the monitor. And certainly at the time, you couldn't get color matching that exact. You could only do that with a professional publisher. It's gotten better, but you're still not going to get true Pantone colors, but you might run across that concept in the workplace, especially if you're printing professionally. Well, we talked about how the higher resolution you use with your images, the more storage space it's going to take up. And of course, data can be either in use, in transit, or at rest. So at rest it's going to take up a lot of space. In transit it can take up more bandwidth for higher resolution images. So typically we're going to compress images using one of any number of formats. There's a religious war going on the internet even as we speak, with people arguing about whether this is pronounced GIF or GIF. I've always called them GIF files because with a hard G for graphics, although I did read somewhere where the creator of the format pronounces it as GIF. However you pronounce it is fine. JPEG is a much more common compression method because it's more scalable in the sense that if you kind of drag it around, it's a little smoother. But if you drag it too much to make it too big, you're going to see that stair-stepping and you're going to experience a lot of loss of resolution. So JPEG isn't great. MPEG for movie files is very common. But all of these compression methods, you're going to see loss in resolution unless you're using the high-res detailed image. So if you care about saving space, you want to compress your images, but if you're at the other end of the scale and you want the highest quality possible, such as for high-end publishing, you're going to use vector graphics. Now vector graphics are different because instead of being a bitmapped image, they're plotted as mathematical lines, so it doesn't matter with vector graphics, such as you'd use for PostScript, you'd drag it out just as much as you want and the resolution stays absolutely the same, i.e. the best resolution possible. But working with PostScript files can be a little challenging because, well, for a variety of reasons we don't need to get into here. Just be aware that PostScript is a format that's used for high-end desktop publishing. PDF is another file format that's it's really a standard now. That's supposed to give you control over a file. The problem is PDF was created as a format to not let people edit a file. So you take a Word file and convert it to a PDF so people couldn't change it. But of course now if you get the full version of Adobe Acrobat, not just the free reader but the full paid version of Adobe, you can edit PDF. So I don't quite see what the point is anymore. PDFs, you have to be very careful with fonts because they don't always translate well. So anytime you create a PDF, whether it's for a homework assignment or for a business report, always double check that it's translating the fonts correctly because it's doing a lot of conversion behind the scenes into the PDF format. Next topic is video controllers. So a monitor is connected via cable to a video controller, which is on the graphics card that's plugged into the motherboard, which connects to a video bus, which connects to the processor and storage, and everything's connected via bus. That's in a separate chapter. A lot of you gamers out there are already aware of this, that your video card has everything to do with the speed of your gaming experience, especially for high-resolution graphics and well, and even for watching movies and such. But the refresh rate of the monitor is important. The amount of video RAM, so these are RAM chips that are on the video card itself. This is in addition to the RAM that's on the motherboard that the processor is using. So it's the same kind of RAM, it's just dedicated for one purpose, which is processing graphics. And yeah, in order to graphic accelerator usually means that there's an additional processor on the graphics card, again to offload some of the processing power from the main processor on the motherboard onto the video card, again just to speed things up. And so you pay more for a higher end video card. I don't. Some of you probably have invested a frightening amount of money into video cards for gaming. When I'm giving an exam, I want my students to know about the different types of monitors, but some are more important than others. CRTs are the ones that you see at Goodwill all the time. We can't give CRT monitors away anymore. You know, you can't even sell one for $5 anymore. Nobody wants them because they're big and heavy and clunky. So there are a number of flat panel models that help to phase out the CRT monitor. LCDs, old-fashioned, standard, replaced by plasma displays, which are quickly replaced by LED displays. When you think of an LCD display, just think of, I think of a calculator screen. You don't have to remember that it's a matrix of liquid crystals, or, you know, TFT technology. Just, I think the picture helps. Plasma displays for monitors were better, although still pretty clunky, and required a lot more power was the big problem. The power problem, the energy consumption power, was then mostly solved by switching over to LED displays. Light emitting diodes, I don't know if Musselman would test you on that, but the fact that they're thin, I think the low power consumption is the #1 benefit of switching to LED displays. Wider viewing angle. If you go into, I haven't seen them at Best Buy, but at what's the place in St. Louis? Not Computer World, Micro Center. Those new monitors that are kind of curved, you know, like this. Oh, that's nice, and kind of wraps around. Oh, if I were a gamer, that's what I would get. You are going to run into all of these video connectors in the workplace because even though just a plain old 15-pin VGA cable is really old, it still works. And so, especially on projectors, you'll see this a lot. Somebody might still have a monitor that uses a VGA cable. It's just such a universal standard, it's still in use, but the quality isn't great. DVI is kind of the chunkier one, has more squared connector. So faster bus, all digital. Notice that VGA is all analog and DVI is all digital. remember from a previous chapter that any digital signal is less prone to error than an analog signal. And finally, HDMI is probably the best if you had to pick a best video connector standard, just because it's not just for video, but it's also for audio. So one single port that does both, it saves space and it saves configuration. For example, the way I have two monitors on my home PC here. I've got one connected to the DVI port and the other connected to the HDMI port. There are different ways of doing it with splitters and whatnot, but that's an easy way to hook up two monitors. I show my class a lot of these videos. This guy's crazy. He's frenetic and high energy, which I think students relate to, but I'm not going to show that inside my video. If you'd like to see a fun video on different video connectors, which I know doesn't sound fun, but it's an interesting video. But I include the link in case you want it. The larger point is that just because we're focusing on a couple of video standards, that doesn't mean that they're not a lot. We've had a lot of trial and error ever since the 80s. Oh my God, I'm showing my age. With CGA graphics, and I mean originally it was just monochrome, and then CGA. We had four colors on the screen. And VGA comes in here somewhere. Then 4K. The number of video standards can get confusing. So when you're shopping for both a monitor and a video card, you want to look at the video standards that they support. Now I've got this in green. This is not something that you need to memorize. I just want to make you aware of the complexity of video standards. The biggest issue you're going to run into, just if you're running calls from the help desk, a lot of people have trouble with projectors, another output device, right? So instead of or in addition to displaying on the monitor, you're also displaying on the projector. Most projectors are lower resolution, much lower resolution than most displays, and 9 times out of 10 you have to go into your display properties in Windows and crank the resolution down to match whatever the maximum resolution on the projector is, just to get a clean looking image. I mentioned different ways to hook up two monitors. I use different ports, the DVI port and the HDMI port. They make splitter cards. They make graphic cards that have two ports on them, which is pretty straightforward. Printers, the next output device. So in our little family of printer history here, from the dot matrix, these Okadata 320s are bulletproof. You will still see them in little kind of mom and pop shops. Dot matrix printers are great for those three-part forms, for duplicate, triplicate forms. Inkjet printers, and then laser printers. In fact, that's a picture of the one I've got at home. It's great. For these types of printers, I call them dot matrix, but you may hear it called an impact printer because it's making an impact on the paper. They're extremely loud. Inkjet printers, sometimes people mistakenly call them a DeskJet printer, but that's a brand name for HP, or BubbleJet, at least used to be a brand name for Canon, but inkjet is the generic term. And then laser printers is really the standard. Laser printers are so cheap now, I hate to say it, but they're kind of disposable. When you can pick up a new one for $75 at Office Depot, whew, that's great. Yeah, dot matrix, why do we still have it? For companies that have boxes and boxes and boxes of triplicate forms that they still use for invoicing, for purchase orders, for who knows what. In warehouses across the country, around the world, there are a ton of dot matrix printers. Inkjet printers, the argument for an inkjet printer used to be that it was cheaper than a laserjet. I'm not sure that's true anymore. Although if you're into photography and printing off photos, you can get some really high resolutions with a good, like a Epson high-end inkjet printer, up to 1200 dpi, which is ridiculous. Again, that's professional grade. But certainly the most common. Laser printers are kind of charging the toner so that it sticks to the paper, so it's a different type of printing. The laser, the drum, the laser modulators, they're different kind of moving parts inside the laser printer, so there's a lot more to replace inside, and sometimes the consumables in the laser printer get really expensive. Just some common brands. If you stay with any of these brands, I think these are all solid. You'll find that the company you're either working for now or that you're going to work for will standardize on a brand name. We really don't like to have let departments pick their own. You know, this department likes Lexmark, and that department likes HP, and this other department is using Canon, and that department uses Brother, because it's too expensive to store toner for all these different makes and manufacturers. It's much better if you standardize on one family of printers and then just stock all the expendables, toner, drum kits, cleaners for one family of printers. In terms of support issues for printers, I mentioned sticking with one family to cut down on costs of expendables. The other issue with printer support is you really want to stay away from letting people have individual printers. It's a support nightmare and it's really expensive. The best practice is for each department to have a big workhorse laser printer that supports the needs of the entire department. It's expensive to let everybody have their own printer, and plus it drives up your support costs, because anytime there's a printer jam, you're having to make another desk side call to an individual, and maybe it's a user error. So most companies don't let people have their own printer. The exception being executives always get their own printer. Why? Because they're executives and they get what they want. The other argument for having your own printer is if you're printing off sensitive information, proprietary information that you don't want to appear on a public printer, you can make a business argument. So it's always the business requirements that drives the technology decision for having an individual printer. For example, I have one in my office. I don't need one, but I've got one in my office because I might print off grades, and I don't want student grades to appear on the CMIS department's printer, just in case somebody were to see. So business requirements. Another type of output device looks like a printer, but it's not. A plotter is you're going to see, and if you're supporting a team of engineers or architects who are need to print off these big blueprints or maps on very large paper, so the paper, instead of coming on in single sheets, is just on this huge roll. Plotters are extremely expensive, and the consumables are extremely expensive. If you're printing off banners, schematics, even posters. I've never heard anybody call this a large format printer, but you might. Pop quiz, a scanner, is that an input or an output device? Right, input. It's an input device. We're taking information, getting into the PC. You've probably used a scanner at some point, although really these days having a full flatbed scanner isn't as necessary, because there are apps like Scannable, at least for the iPhone, where you can just hold your phone over a piece of paper and it'll scan it in as a JPEG, as a PDF, whatever you want, and then sync it with Evernote or Dropbox. And so the need for having a flatbed scanner is not as great as it used to be. But when you're scanning something in, there are two ways to scan a document. One is as text and one is as a graphic. And believe it or not, it's much easier to scan something in as a graphic, as one single graphic file, such as a JPEG file. The problem with scanning something in as text, which is a process called optical character recognition, it's reading all the text on the page and trying to import, read it correctly and import it into a text file, like a Microsoft Word file, for you, so that you don't have to retype. And I agree that retyping is evil. You never want to have to retype something if you don't have to. The problem is I have yet to see one that an OCR system that works well. Even if it gets 98% of it right, you still have to read through the entire thing and make corrections to everything. So I've never seen an OCR system that saves that much time. That said, it kind of depends on the quality of the scanner, and it really depends on the quality of what you're scanning. If they're old documents, forget about it. Just retype them. If they're newer laser printed documents, you might be able to. But typically, you can get to the original file more and more. So OCR technology is kind of less of an issue these days. That said, I would know what OCR stands for the test. Okay. Audio devices. Sound cards are cool, but only if you're doing your own, creating your own music on a personal PC. Do you really care about the quality of your sound card? Or you're just an audio nut and you want the highest output possible to your speakers. It's just not a business concern, so that's why I skip over this. Before I forget, let me back up for a second. There's something missing on this slide in terms of the generations of printers and the types of printers, because there's a new type of printer that we haven't talked about yet, and that's 3D printing, and I don't think it's in the Bird textbook. 3D printing, way cool, and the costs are coming down, down, down. I mean, you used to have to spend tens of thousands of dollars. Now, probably under $1,000, you can pick up a 3D printer. But for you guys, as students, what's cool is you've got access to a 3D printer. You may not know it. If you go over to Lovejoy Library, there's a 3D printer there. They've got a couple of them that are there for student use. So if you've either downloaded a not an image, but a sculptural thing, a 3D rendering that you want to create, all you have to do is pay for the plastic, which is nothing. Couple of bucks, if that. They've got all the stuff, and I don't know how they charge you for it, but there's just a kind of a nominal processing fee. Or if you want to create your own, ooh, you should try it out. So that's one of the advantages of being a student, is you've got access to cool stuff like that. So go over to Lovejoy Library. Stephen Pryor is the reference librarian that handles the 3D printer. Super smart guy. He's done demos for me for 310 before of 3D printing. Check that out in Lovejoy. Okay, back to audio now. The only audio bit I think it's worth talking about is with speech recognition, and a lot of people that have never actually done speech recognition think, oh, this would be great if I did. I don't type that well, and if I could just talk to the computer and it would automatically type in what I'm saying. It can work. The most mature solution in speech recognition is still Dragon Naturally Speaking. They've been around forever. They still haven't perfected it, though. So speech recognition requires a DSP, digital signal processor, so a dedicated processor that's handling the input of your voice into the system. So speech recognition is another form of input. And the biggest problem is you have to train it. So if you're doing your own research and interviewing a lot of people and you don't want to transcribe all of the interviews, so this is something I had to do for my dissertation research. I interviewed 25 people and had to type up all of their words. Theoretically, I could have had a microphone and had Dragon Naturally Speaking translate it. The problem is, in order for Dragon Naturally Speaking to work, you have to train it to your voice, and everybody's voice is different. And when you're interviewing somebody, they're not going to take 10 minutes to read off a list of words to train the system on their speech, their accent. So this is another technology that if you're the only one using it, again, kind of like optical character recognition, you still have to go back and make fix so many errors. It just doesn't seem worth the trouble to me. You don't have to spend money on Dragon Natural Speaking, even though that's probably the best product out there. in Windows itself, you can turn on speech recognition and start training Windows on how to recognize your voice and issue commands. So this would be something fun to play around with. I do want to talk about a couple of important topics for input-output devices for people with physical disabilities. So speech recognition is actually a lifesaver for somebody that has some kind of physical impairment where it's difficult for them to type. So voice recognition can be a better form of input for the visually impaired, for blind people. And I've worked with a guy, he was actually a doctoral student at University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and oh my goodness, the software he had to use that would read the screen to him, it's terrible. It drives you crazy. If you want to see how bad it is, just watch this YouTube video to see how terrible life is for people that have lost their sight and how difficult it is for them to interact with the computer. So typing is not the issue, because blind people can touch type usually just fine. Once you get your hands in the right position, you can type away. You just can't see what's on the screen, so you need it's called a screen scraper that reads off everything. But the problem is it reads off everything in all the menus, every ad in your browser window. So things that we just ignore naturally, that are off to the side, all of those get read at high speed to them. It'll drive you nuts. The final real-world I/O issue I want to get into, which the textbook doesn't, but you'll probably run into this at work. If you're supporting a lot of servers, it's ridiculous to hook up a monitor, keyboard, and mouse to every single server. So you've got, imagine racks of servers, just racks and racks and racks of servers tightly packed together. There's no way you could have that many monitors for every single server. So to get around that, what we use is a KVM switch. KVM for keyboard, video, and mouse. Keyboard, video, mouse. That's what KVM stands for. I don't know if Musselman will ask you that on an exam. I do. You'll notice on the back of one where, so server 1, and of course these are older interfaces, but they might just be USB interfaces on newer ones, for keyboard, mouse, video, keyboard, mouse, video, keyboard, mouse, video. And then on the front of the box, you just click a button for which server, server 1, server 2, server 3, server 4 you want to connect to. This is a small KVM switch. They make them that go up to like 16. But the idea is it saves space and saves really complexity. You can even have like a single KVM switch that lets you connect to every single server in your data center, depending on how you set it up. Makes cable management a lot easier too. In a data center, you're definitely going to see this, and this is it's not a sophisticated piece of I/O technology, but it's a really handy one. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed my version of input-output devices, Chapter 7. If you have any questions, I really am a resource for you. So even though I don't have you in a class, I'll probably have you in a future class. Please reach out to me if I can ever help you out. I'm in the CMIS department all the way down at the end. Just go past Musselman's office. I'm all the way at the end. My name's Tim Jacks. My email is tjacks@siue.edu. I'll be happy to help you out. So until I see you in a future class, take care.